Have you ever been overwhelmed by a thought so intense, so consuming, that it pulled you away from the present moment? A thought you didn't choose, but one that stayed, whispered, demanded your attention, until it became hard to breathe, hard to rest, hard to be still. And what if that thought was about sex? In a world where sexual energy is either glorified or shamed, we rarely ask the deeper question. What is this energy truly pointing to? What if I told you that even sexual thoughts, often seen as distractions, can become doorways to profound awareness? Not enemies to be suppressed, but teachers waiting to be understood. Welcome, dear friend. You are now in Lotus of Dharma, your refuge for clarity, insight, and mindful living rooted in timeless Buddhist wisdom. If you find value in truth, if you're ready to explore desire with open eyes and a steady heart, I invite you to like, subscribe, and most importantly, stay until the very end. Because what we're about to uncover may forever change the way you see your mind, your cravings, and your spiritual path. The nature of sexual thoughts. To understand the nature of sexual thoughts is not to suppress them, nor to glorify them, but to see them clearly, as they are. These thoughts are not sinful intrusions, nor signs of a broken spirit. Rather, they are expressions of the human condition, natural, spontaneous, and deeply rooted in a desire for connection, warmth, and intimacy. In the same way the mind creates anger in moments of threat, or joy in times of comfort, it gives rise to sexual imagery and longing when it perceives beauty, tenderness, or possibility. It is not the thought itself that binds us, it is our relationship to it. The Buddha, in his immense compassion and clarity, never taught us to fear our thoughts. He did not ask us to wage war against desire. What he taught was discernment, the ability to watch the mind without clinging, without aversion. He reminded us that thoughts, like clouds, pass across the sky of awareness. They arise. They linger. And they pass. To follow every cloud is to become lost. But to sit beneath the sky and observe, this is mindfulness. Sexual thoughts often carry a heavy burden in our culture. We are taught to feel ashamed, to hide them, to pretend they do not exist. But shame only deepens attachment, driving the mind into secrecy, guilt, and internal conflict. When we sit in meditation and such a thought arises, the untrained mind may panic. I shouldn't be thinking this. I must be impure. But the trained mind, the mind steeped in the Dharma, simply notes, a thought of desire has arisen. Let me watch it, gently. The origin of sexual desire is neither wholly physical nor purely mental. It is existential. There is in each of us a longing, not just for union with another body, but for a deeper reunion with something beyond the self. Many who crave touch are truly craving connection. Many who seek pleasure are, at heart, seeking to forget their loneliness, their restlessness, their fear of emptiness. Sexual thoughts, then, are not only about sex. They are about our attempt to feel alive, to feel loved, to feel whole. But when we do not examine them, they control us. When we do, they can teach us. To walk the Buddhist path is not to become numb or indifferent. It is to become awake. And to awaken is to see things as they are, not as we wish them to be. When sexual thoughts arise, we need not suppress them. Suppression is just another form of resistance. And resistance feeds the fire. Instead, we meet the thought with spaciousness. We allow it to be seen, not acted upon, not pushed away, but held in the cradle of awareness. In this space, transformation becomes possible. The energy of desire is powerful. That is why so many spiritual traditions feared it, but the Buddha, with subtle wisdom, did not fear it. He taught that this same energy, when purified through mindfulness and compassion, becomes the fuel for loving kindness, for concentration, for enlightenment itself. The lotus grows from the mud, not from sterile ground. And so it is with us. Our mudded, tangled thoughts, including those of lust, are not signs of failure. They are invitations. If we relate to them skillfully, they become the very material of awakening. So let us not be at war with our minds. Let us become friends with them. Let us meet our sexual thoughts not as enemies, but as visitors, curious, powerful, sometimes urgent, but never permanent. With every moment of mindfulness, we step out of the storm and into the stillness. And in that stillness, even desire becomes transparent, not because it vanishes, but because we finally see through it. This is the nature of sexual thoughts, not obstacles on the path, but part of it. Not stains on our soul, but reflections on the mirror of the mind. And when the mirror is clear, all things, even longing, become light. What happens when we resist or suppress? When sexual thoughts arise, and we immediately label them as wrong, dirty, or sinful, we are not freeing ourselves, we are simply pushing them into the shadows of our consciousness. And what hides in the dark rarely weakens. Instead, it festers. It distorts. It begins to operate beneath the surface, shaping our behaviors in ways we no longer recognize. As the Zen teaching wisely states, what you resist, persists. It means that when we fight the mind fights back. When we reject a thought with force, it returns with greater intensity, like trying to drown a ball underwater, only to have it burst up with more pressure the moment we lose grip. Suppression may look like control from the outside, but internally, it breeds guilt. And guilt is not the same as wisdom. Guilt makes us hide. It makes us ashamed not only of our actions, but of our very nature. Over time, guilt transforms into secrecy, and secrecy becomes a quiet prison. In that prison, we feel alone. We begin to fear ourselves, mistrust our own minds. And worst of all, we may begin to believe that we are unworthy of peace. But Buddhism offers a different way. Not the path of repression, but the path of awareness. Mindfulness does not judge the thought, it sees it. And in seeing it clearly, without fear or indulgence, the thought begins to lose its grip. Like a flame that dies out when there is no fuel, the intensity of craving fades when it is no longer being fed by resistance or fantasy. This is not a passive act, it is the deepest form of courage. To sit with desire without acting on it. To breathe with it. To ask, what are you trying to tell me? What longing beneath you has not been heard? In this space of compassionate inquiry, something miraculous happens. The raw energy of the thought begins to soften. It no longer controls us. And when it arises again, as it surely will, we are no longer shaken. We greet it like an old friend passing through, not invited, not feared, simply noticed. This is the wisdom of mindfulness. It teaches us that freedom is not found in the absence of desire, but in the absence of attachment. We no longer have to fight our thoughts or pretend they don't exist. We can let them come, and let them go. Like birds crossing the open sky, leaving no trace behind. The mindful approach to sexual thoughts. To deal with sexual thoughts mindfully is not merely a technique, it is an invitation to transform the way we relate to the very movements of our own mind. In Buddhist practice, we do not attempt to erase thoughts, nor do we fear them. We approach them with the same care and attention that a wise gardener gives to the changing seasons, patiently, without judgment, and always with love. So, when a sexual thought arises, as it inevitably will for any human being, the first step is not to react, but to recognize. Recognition is the doorway to awareness. Without it, we are carried by the current. But the moment we notice, this is a sexual thought, we step out of the river and onto the bank. We are no longer caught. We are observing. Not with shame. Not with craving. But with presence. This recognition should be calm and non-dramatic. You simply say to yourself, "This is a thought about desire." That's all. You don't need to attach a story to it. You don't need to explain it or explore its details. Just name it, gently, like noticing a breeze. Once we recognize, the next step is to observe. This is the heart of mindfulness. We observe the thought as we would a bird flying across the sky. We don't follow it. We don't chase it. We don't shoot it down. We just let it pass. If the mind tries to build a story, if it adds images, emotions, or old memories, we see that, too, and gently return to stillness. But we also don't push it away. Repression is not mindfulness, it's fear wearing spiritual robes. Mindfulness allows the thought to be there, without either indulging it or fighting it. This non-reactive space is what brings healing. And here comes the deeper practice, investigation. Once the mind is stable, we ask a simple but profound question. What am I really longing for right now? What am I trying to soothe, or escape, or fulfill? Because sexual thoughts are rarely just about sex. Often, they are masks worn by deeper needs, the need for love, for connection, for being seen, for safety, or for comfort in the face of emotional pain. Sometimes we crave pleasure because we are overwhelmed. Other times, we seek arousal to avoid sadness. Or we feel desire not for a person, but for the feeling of being wanted. When we can see this clearly, the sexual thought loses its authority. It no longer drives us blindly. It becomes transparent, not because it disappears, but because we have seen through its disguise. And then, we return to the breath. The breath is where the body meets the present. It is where thinking pauses and knowing begins. In moments of craving or distraction, the breath is not just oxygen, it is refuge. Feel the air entering your nose. Feel the belly rise and fall. Let your attention settle there, not in fantasy, not in resistance, but in this moment, this breath. You may need to return 100 times. That is not failure. That is practice. Each return is a strengthening of your awareness. Each time you breathe instead of react, you teach the mind a new path, one that leads not to shame, nor indulgence, but to peace. And slowly, with time, something inside begins to shift. You begin to realize, I am not my thoughts. I am the space in which thoughts arise and pass. I do not need to obey every desire. I can sit with it. Watch it. Let it pass. And in that letting go, a deeper strength is born, a strength not of suppression, but of understanding. This is how the Buddha taught us to walk the middle path, not clinging, not rejecting, but abiding in the truth of what is. Sexual thoughts will come and go. They are part of life. But your freedom does not lie in their absence. Your freedom lies in your ability to be with them, with presence, with kindness, with wisdom. This is the mindful approach. And it is enough. Transforming sexual energy into wisdom. In Buddhist practice, we do not view sexual energy as something to be feared or destroyed. We see it for what it truly is, a powerful force of life, rich with potential, and capable of being transformed into something far greater than temporary pleasure. Just as fire can burn or illuminate, Sexual energy can bind us, or liberate us. It all depends on how we relate to it. To repress this energy is to create inner war. To chase it blindly is to become its servant. But to sit with it, to breathe with it, to understand it, this is the path of the wise. Through the steady training of meditation, through the careful cultivation of ethical discipline, and through the nourishing warmth of compassion, this very energy can be alchemized into something radiant. When we do not act on every impulse, the raw power of desire begins to settle. It becomes available for loving kindness, a tenderness that includes ourselves and all beings. It fuels creative expression, offering us insight, poetry, vision, and art. And it deepens spiritual insight, sharpening our awareness of the subtle movements of the mind, the nature of impermanence, and the illusions we cling to. Even the great yogi Milarepa, one of Tibet's most celebrated enlightened masters, was not free from temptation. But he did not run. He did not distract himself. He sat with the fire. And in that sacred stillness, the fire became light. This is the essence of Buddhist transformation, not suppression, but transmutation. What once threatened to consume us becomes the very fuel for awakening. You see, craving is not your enemy. It is your teacher. It shows you where you are still grasping, where you are still afraid, where you are still looking for wholeness outside of yourself. And when you meet craving with full presence, without acting, without judging, it begins to soften. It shows you its true face. And in that face, you may no longer see lust. You may see loneliness, or longing, or a thirst to return to something sacred within you that has been forgotten. This is where wisdom is born, not from the elimination of desire, but from understanding it so deeply that it no longer controls you. Desire loses its grip not because it has been crushed, but because you have awakened. So now, dear one, let us pause and breathe. We have walked together through the terrain of desire, not as judges, not as victims, but as quiet observers of the human condition. We have seen that sexual thoughts are not impurities to be feared, but passing energies to be understood. They are neither shameful nor sacred on their own. Their power lies in how we relate to them. We have seen how resisting or suppressing these thoughts only deepens suffering, driving them into secrecy, where they take distorted forms. And we have touched the truth that mindfulness, gentle, curious, unwavering, offers us a path to freedom, the ability to recognize, observe, and investigate these thoughts without clinging and without shame. We have explored how, with practice and patience, this energy can be transformed into a loving kindness, creativity, clarity, and spiritual insight. And perhaps most importantly, we've remembered that we are not our cravings. We are not defined by the thoughts that pass through the mind. We are the awareness that sees them, the stillness that holds them, the spaciousness that never wavers. The practice is not to become cold or numb, but to become clear. Clear enough to see the waves rise, and choose not to be swept away. Clear enough to feel desire, and not lose ourselves in it. Clear enough to meet even the most powerful craving with the tenderness of understanding. This is the strength of the Dharma, not in silencing the world, but in quieting the self that clings to it. So take a moment now. Let the teachings settle. Let the breath come and go. Let the heart be soft, yet steady. And know this, if you can be with your own mind in moments of desire, without judgment, without indulgence, then you are already walking the path of awakening. Sexual thoughts are not sins. They are not stains on your soul. They are simply waves on the ocean of mind, impermanent, powerful, but never greater than your awareness. When you meet them with mindfulness, they become your mirror. When you hold them with compassion, they'll lose their grip. And when you understand them without fear, They transform into insight, into tenderness, into light. You do not need to fight your desires to be free. You simply need to see them clearly, completely, and without clinging. If today's reflection has touched something within you, I humbly invite you to leave a comment and share your thoughts. This is not just a video, it is a space for awakening, and your presence here is part of that sacred unfolding. And if you haven't yet, please subscribe to Lotus of Dharma, and help us continue to share teachings that nourish the heart and calm the mind. Remember, dear one, the mind is not your enemy. With mindfulness, even desire becomes the path. Until next time, may your breath be steady, may your heart be free, and may your awareness remain your truest home.